me introduce John Coulter, who will do a sum up as I understand it. Dr. John Coulter, National President of SPA, has had a lifetime of environmental work from the mid-1950s, including with the South Australian Conservation Council and the ACF. He was Australian Democrat Senator 1987 to 95 and Leader 1990 to 1993. He introduced the first legislation to control ozone-depleting substances, the first legislation to protect threatened species, and the first major Senate inquiry into climate change. So it looks like John Coulter is very adequately equipped to sum up, and we invite him to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. This has been an incredibly ambitious conference, and I think everybody will agree that it's tackled issues on a very, very broad canvas, but I think it has been very successful. The reason that SPA attempted this ambitious conference was that we saw that while we're all dedicated to sustainability, some of us are looking at population and see everything in those terms. Other people are looking at climate change and see everything in those terms, and others are looking at peak oil and so on down the list. And yet we are now in a situation in which all those things are quite rapidly impacting on the human situation simultaneously. And we do need to look at them, each one in the context of each of the others. For example, the energy which we now use is predominantly fossil energy. That energy is rapidly becoming more scarce and more expensive, and yet that is the energy we need to use to make some of the transitions which people are talking about. We now use fossil energy, for instance, to build windmills to generate electricity or to make solar panels. And of course, picking up on the Millennium Development Goals was an excellent opportunity to show particularly how these things are going to differentially impact around the world and impact particularly on poor people, although some people have claimed with some justification that it may be the rich who will actually suffer first when the crunch really comes. Anyway, that having been said, if I could... have you got the slides up there? No. Sorry, I don't know where you got that one from. Can we have the first slide? Oh, okay. Okay, well, we picked these up because I've only got 4 slides here, but we have, for instance, also picked up on the theme of peak oil. But of course, peak oil and climate change indeed are only examples of the way in which humanity has already moved well outside the capability of the natural environment to supply our needs. Climate change and what we're doing to the atmosphere and consequently to the climate represents humanity's excessive demands on that atmosphere to handle those changes. Peak oil, if you like, is shorthand, as Richard Heinberger said, for peak everything. I'm reminded that in terms of food production, we're shortly running into peak phosphorus. Phosphorus, an absolutely essential element in Australia for the production of food here, and yet we have mined the phosphorus reserves of the world and run them down at a very fast rate. And we may relatively soon run into a situation where we'll no longer be able to supply the phosphorus fertilisers. Nitrogen fertilisers. Those of you who have read the book The Upside of Down will have noted in there that Thomas Homer Dixon points out that 40% of all the nitrogen in human bodies now is actually artificially produced, and most of that comes from natural gas, the manufacture of ammonium fertilisers. So there are a number of these factors which are impacting at the same time, and which are imminently impacting on the human condition. Now, Will Stephan had a very interesting slide when he showed that very, very narrow peak, time along the baseline, and a very, very narrow peak, which is the present, the last few hundred years, which is the period of the availability of cheap energy, a rapid explosion in human population, a rapid explosion in the consumption of all the other resources, a peak, and then a fall back down to a baseline. Have we got those slides there? Pardon? You downloaded the right one. Anyway, the situation broadly is one in which the impact on the environment is far too great. It needs to be reduced, and that impact is a product of both population and per capita impact. And one of the slides I wanted to put up was the rate of growth of the economy, the Australian economy over the last 25 years of the 20th century, which shows that the economy was growing at just over 3%, that the per capita rate of growth was about 1.8%, indicating that about 60% of the increase of impact was related to increase in per capita demand, in other words, increase in consumption, and 40% to population. And you'll remember that Will Stephan said that during the whole of the 20th century, the human impact had increased 50-fold, about 7-fold in terms of population and 7-fold in terms of per capita demand. So that we need to operate on both of these factors. Why can we not, and this is a question that's come up repeatedly during this conference, why can we not reduce our consumption? And one of the things which has not been mentioned is the way in which we have built an economic system around the creation of debt. If I discover a certain amount of coal or a certain amount of natural gas or gold or copper or anything else, and I float a company, I go out into the community and I either have people invest in shares, or I go to the finance industry and I ask people for loans. And that money comes to me as a debt on which I have to pay an interest, and as soon as I have to pay more back than I actually got initially, that locks that situation into one in which I must produce more and more and more year on year to service that debt. So there is a fundamental flaw, I believe, in the economic system which needs to be changed, because what we need to get to in terms of resource consumption is what Al Bartlett described as a depletion protocol, and was taken up again by Richard Heinberg, in which we only take a proportion of each of the non-renewable resources per year, and in absolute amounts that goes down over time and the resource is never exhausted.